Good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
Unfortunately, I do not have a talk of the Rebbe, Sikha of the Rebbe, translated into English, or at least ones that I found that's appropriate for our type crowd. So I chose for the first time to read it from the Rebbe's talk in Yiddish, not Hebrew, and translate it. And I hope that you'll be able to follow.
Gonna make it tough to read ahead.
We are studying volume 29, second talk of the Rebbe on this week's Parsha Eikev. One of the sections in this week's Parsha portion, I believe the sixth Aliyah, is the second chapter of Shema, V'haya im Shamoya. And last week we read about the Shema prayer, and today we studied the V'hayam Shamoa. I think, I'm not sure. If not, I think it's V'hayam Shamoa. In the portion of Shema, last year I shared there are 10 commandments. In V'hayam Shamoa, many of the commandments reappear. Among them is the mitzvah of mezuzah and the mitzvah of tefillin. In addition, Vayomer, the third chapter of Shema, contains the mitzvah of tzitzit, a garment of 4 corners that must have strands, 8 strands on each corner, totaling 32 strands. This is the topic of our discussion. In Soif Hilchos Mezuzah, Zog the Rambam, says the Rebbe, at the end of the laws of Mezuzah, the Maimonides, who codify Jewish law on every part of the Torah, writes the following: Chayav Adam leizar b'mezuzah mipnei shechayvas hakol tamid. A person must be extremely careful about keeping the mitzvah of mezuzah because it is obligatory continuously without a stop. There is no time where you are exempt. When you sleep or at night, or on a holiday, there is no time when you can be exempt. Anytime a person enters and leaves the house, anytime a person enters and leaves the house, he would remember how God runs the show, is all over, and he is always watching over us, and that will remind a person to behave, to conduct himself when he goes to bed, when he wakes up, when he brings guests to the house, when he goes to eat, when he goes out to business. He's always reminded that God is watching. What served that reminder is the mezuzah. That's why we've got to be extremely careful about the mitzvah of mezuzah, which means it should be checked that it's kosher, which means it should be placed properly, which means a blessing was recited when it was placed. V'yeda, and a person should know, nothing stands or exists forever in our universe, except knowing that God is here. This is something that has been and is and will be forever. As soon as he remembers that God is the only existence that's forever, he's reminded of it, and that will keep him intact, checked in to behave and conduct himself. The early sages say, anyone who has tefillin in his head, and his arm, v'tzitzis bebigdoi, and a tzitzit on his garment, mezuzah bepitchoi, and mezuzah on the entrance to his house, muchzak hu, he is for sure, he is guaranteed, shelo yechta, that he will not sin. Sha'arei yesh lo mazkirin rabin, because he has many reminders. Ve'hein hamalochim shematzilin oisem milachtoi, and they are the angels who saves the person from sin. Shenemar, as it's written, choine malach havaya sobev lireya v'chaltzim Brich Hachamon of the sign. As it's written, God's angel is camped near those who fear God, and he saves them. And that's the conclusion of the laws of mezuzah. This is Rambam. So far it was in Hebrew. Rambam writes the following. Person should be extremely careful about the mitzvah of mezuzah because A, it is continuous without any exemption. And our early sages tell us that when a person rubs tefillin on the arm and the head, and a mezuzah by the door, and he wears a tzitzit, he is surrounded by God. It saves him because he always remembers God is watching and cares for us. And he's also protected from doing the wrong thing. And at the same time, God himself protects him. And these are the angels that protects the man. A person is being saved from harm by having tefillin, mezuzah, and tzitzit continuously. This is Rambam in the laws of mezuzah. The rabbi is going to ask two questions. Now, the Rebbe's teaching, the way it goes is he goes in to try and answer a question and then proves that it's not a good answer. Then he tried to answer another way, proves we're going to skip that and get to the final answer. But the two questions, darf man verstehen, we need to understand. For was bringt der Rambam der Maimer kol mi sheyesh lo tefillin chulu v'tzitzis chulu mezuzah chulu do in hilchos mezuzah und nicht früher in hilchos tefillin. Die erste mitzvah was wird der Mond in der Maimer. Al kol ponim euch dorten. The Rebbe is asking a simple question. Rambam is talking about three mitzvahs: tefillin, mezuzah, and tzitzit. The order of the mitzvot, the way he's listing them in Jewish law, is tefillin first, mezuzah second, tzitzit third. Also, the way they are written in the Torah is in that way. In Shema, ukshartam, first wrap them on your arm and the head, and then uchtavtam al mezuzot beisecha, and then mezuzah, and then tzitzit. Rambam follows the order the way it's written in the Torah. Why Rambam skipped tefillin, does not say anything, only when he talks about the mezuzah, he's bringing the other two. If it's equally, as the Rambam says, they are the angels that protects men, he should have written them in the law of tefillin and not in the law of mezuzah. Und ob der Rambam will bringen dem einer noch dem, was wir sagt, der Loch ist von alle drei Mitzvahs, sagt das, hat das gedacht bringen später in Hilchot Tzitzis, was kommt noch an die andere zwei Loches. And if Rambam wants to teach us the sgula, the power of these mitzvahs, and he wanted to wait for mentioning all the requirements and the laws of these three mitzvot, he should have waited for tzitzit, which he's going to list later. In other words, Rambam is listing tefillin, mezuzah, tzitzit. He chose mezuzah to explain the power of those three. If you follow Torah way and the way Rambam puts the law, he should have mentioned it by the first one. If you want to wait for mentioning all of them and the requirements and how to do it, wait for tzitzit, which is the third one, and write it there. Rambam chose mezuzah. Must be, says the Rebbe, that mezuzah is something unique that is supersedes tefillin and tzitzit, that Rambam chose this mitzvah to mention about the other two. Any questions?
We got the question.
The rabbi is asking, I'm going to give you a summary, that the idea of remembering God, which is the basis of the Rambam's explaining the specialty of those mitzvot, appears in tzitzit. It says, Uri'isam oisoish, see the tzitzit, uzechartem, and remember God that took you out of Egypt. So the idea to remember God when you go in and out, or when you wrap it on your arm and head, and when you put a tzitzit, this is the idea that they become angels to protect and men stay away from trouble, is mentioned in tzitzit, not in mezuzah. And therefore, there is a better reason to put it in tzitzit, not in mezuzah. And the Rebbe says that if you look in the Talmud, where Rambam took it from, actually it is mentioned in the law of tefillin, not in mezuzah. So Rambam writes about the uniqueness of mezuzah, and then he says the three mitzvot, tefillin, mezuzah, and tzitzit, are equally the same, and by protecting person, they become his angels. So the Rebbe is asking a simple question. the order of the mitzvot given by God and the way Rambam codified it is tefillin first, supported by tefillin, the first time you talk about this one of them. If you want to wait for mentioning all of these requirements and the proper way of performing the mitzvot, wait until tzitzit. In addition, says the Rebbe, two points. A, the idea to remember God by performing one of these three mitzvot is only mentioned by tzitzit. So wait for tzitzit, say that part of the mitzvah is to remember God, and that guards the person. In addition, says Rabbi, if you go back in the Talmud Menachot, who lists this point, it's in the tractate Menachot, it talks about tefillin. Rambam omitted it from tefillin and mentions it in mezuzah. Now it's a second question. Says the Rebbe, let's compare the way the language Rambam writes and the language where he took it from the Talmud, and there is a deviation. This is the words of the Talmud. כל שיש לו תפילין בראשו ותפילין בזרועו וציציץ בבגדו ומזוזה בפתחו, הכל בחיזוק שלו, יחטא שנאמר והחוט המשולש שלו מהרו יתנתק, ואומר חיינה מלאך הווי שאו ליראו ואכלתם. I just read to you from the Talmud. The Talmud says, anyone who keeps tefillin on the hand and on the head, and keeps a mezuzah on his doorpost, and wears tzitzit, he is certainly supported by God, and God will protect him not to get any hurt. He shouldn't be hurt. Why? Because there is a verse in the Bible that says that a robe that is intertwined from three strands will never be separated. In other words, if I have one string that's made out of one piece, there is a way to pull against it and rip it. But if it's multiplied by three and it's intertwined three times, it will be almost impossible to rip it, because if you rip one part, the other two are supporting it. Says the Talmud that when you have those three mitzvot, they both about testimony that God is watching. They all three are reminding us of God, and all three combined together will make our connection to God in a way that will never be able to get separated. And that's the uniqueness of those three. This is the Talmud. The Rebbe is asking. I know two questions about this. The Rambam is a mashmi deraya from the Master Storyteller was the Gemara brings shenema bachutam shalom b'meroin. Second is base also moisif sharesh l'maskirim rabim ve'enem amalachim shematzilin noisem malachtoi. The Rebbe says, I don't understand. Rambam omitted the verse about the three strand, achut meshulash, a robe made out of three separate strings combined together will never be separated. That verse Rambam does not mention at all. It's not there. But Rambam is adding something that Talmud is not talking about. Rambam says that those mitzvot become angels to support the person, to protect the person. The Talmud is not talking about angels. Rambam added it. And these are the two questions. The rabbi is going to go back and forth to try and explain. Again, the first question is Rambam chose mezuzah, which is the second of the three, to mention the uniqueness of all three. Instead, he should have put it in either on the first time, which is tefillin, or the last time, which is tzitzit, because especially tzitzit, the idea of remembering God appears in the text of the Torah. Second question says Rabbi Rambam took it from the Talmud tractate Menachot. Over there, the Talmud adds a verse from Bible that tells us that three mitzvot are like a robe made out of three strings, and they are combined together, which makes it almost impossible to be torn. And therefore, all three together combined, tefillin, tzitzit, and mezuzah, will protect the person. Rambam omitted that verse as the Rabbi. Why? Rambam added that those three will serve as angels to protect the person, and that does not appear in the text of the Talmud. Why did Rambam add that? The Rebbe would attempt to answer this question with the following, and I'm going to go through a few pages. The Rebbe says that When Rambam is talking about mezuzah, it does not say in the mitzvah of mezuzah, but mezuzah. Chayav Adam, a person is obligated, leizaher, to be careful, b'mezuzah, in mezuzah. Why in the mitzvah of mezuzah? Why shouldn't it say in the mitzvah of mezuzah? When it comes to tefillin, right away, Rambam says the mitzvah of tefillin. When it comes to tzitzit, Rambam writes the mitzvah of tzitzit, but mezuzah, Rambam omitted the word mitzvah. And the Rebbe is saying, Rebbe tried to explain it in certain ways, and he proves that it doesn't make sense. It does not fit with the text. I want to get to the final answer so we can have a complete understanding of the Rebbe's. The following is the Rebbe's explanation. Now you can see how Rambam is studied properly. Not only every word is meticulous, the word mezuzah, not mitzvah of mezuzah, is a great teaching, but also the order. Why did he choose to teach us this idea in this mitzvah, not before, not after? Says the Rebbe, we can explain it in the following way. Das was the Rambam sagt, Chayav Adam lehizoer. When Rambam in Mezuzah tells us you got to be careful with Mezuzah, meint nicht dem Chiyuv Hazeus in sein Mekayim sein Mitzvahs Mezuzah. It is not talking about the mitzvah of affixing the Mezuzah, that he has to be careful. No, the Zeirus in der Peula of von dem Hefzer von Mezuzah v'toichna. He means to say the effect that the mezuzah will have on the person just by being placed in that on the doorpost. In other words, in the mezuzah, when do you? I'm jumping ahead. When do you fulfill the mitzvah of mezuzah? One time, when you put it up. Only when you check it. By the way, the month of Elul is time to check tefillin and mezuzot to make sure they're kosher. And if you want to beat the rush, do it now. My son just sent this tefillin. You should do it now. Mezuzah should be placed, and that's how you fulfill the mitzvah of mezuzah. Tefillin, how often do you fulfill the mitzvah? Every time you wrap, every day. Tzitzit, how often do you fulfill the mitzvah? Every single day. When you put the tzitzit, you make a blessing. Mezuzah, I'm paraphrasing the Rebbe's idea. Mezuzah is only once when you put it up. Come Yom Kippur, there is no mitzvah mezuzah unique from yesterday. It's all the same. What Rambam is talking about is not the mitzvah of mezuzah, but the mezuzah itself's effect on the human being. Rambam wants us to be extremely meticulous before we place a mezuzah on the door, making sure it's kosher without a doubt, make sure it's placed on the right spot for sure, making sure a blessing was recited. Why? Because if it's done right, it will affect a human being every single time he enters and leaves the house. But not the mitzvah of the mezuzah, but the mezuzah itself. The mezuzah itself brings God into the house for protection. Not the mitzvah of mezuzah, because the mitzvah of mezuzah is already done when he placed it 7 years ago, 10 years earlier. That's the idea, the uniqueness of mezuzah. Now we can understand why Rambam chose mezuzah and not tzitzit and not tefillin. And I'm going to give you the short idea here. Rebbe says the Rambam is not talking about the mitzvah, because the mitzvah of mezuzah is performed only once. Rambam wants to make sure that every time you enter into the house, you look at the mezuzah, you touch the mezuzah to remind you God is watching you. So it's not the mitzvah of mezuzah, it's the mezuzah. That's how important it is when you do it the first time, you do it right. Now we can understand why Rambam omitted the idea of the three part strings of a robe. The first answer that Rabbi gave is that according to Rambam, tefillin has two mitzvot, hand and head. According to the Talmud over there, it's one mitzvah, so it's become 4, not 3. But says the Rebbe, if you say 3, I think 4 is included in 3, so it's not a good answer. The best answer, the Rebbe says, if I understand it correctly, when you talk about a string, a rope that made out of three, it refers to three mitzvot. And that's what the Talmud is talking about, to fulfill the mitzvah of mezuzah, to fulfill the mitzvah of tefillin, to fulfill the mitzvah of tzitzit. Rambam is not talking about the mitzvot, because if he was talking about the mitzvot, he would mention it by tefillin or by tzitzit. Rambam is talking about the effect a mezuzah will have on the person just by seeing it. We got to be careful when we place it the first time and fulfill the mitzvah, because it will have an effect on the person even when you do not fulfill the mitzvah. And that does not exist with tefillin and tzitzit, because we're talking about the after effect every time you enter and leave. And that's why it chose mezuzah, because that is unique to mezuzah. That's why it chose to remove the word mitzvah of mezuzah, saying just mezuzah.
The angels? That's the next part, the angels?
So what he's saying to you is because he's surrounded the garment, the body, the hand and the arm, and the exterior surrounding the dwelling are all combined together, and they create the angels. Even though the mitzvah is not fulfilled now, was fulfilled 10 years ago.
Okay.
In that way, they are all three equal.
So the Rebbe issues directives to people who have sickness in the house to check the mezuzah.
What? Yes. Anytime. And the Rebbe says that that's why immediately when Rambam concludes the law of mezuzah, he says, thank God for assisting me. Brich rachamano desayon. Thank God for helping me complete this, which is very unusual. He does not write it when he finishes the law of tefillin or the law of writing Torah or the law of tzitzit, only mezuzah. Says the Rebbe, because this mitzvah you fulfill once, but the effect, for the effect to be continuous, you need God's help. Because it stands there, there is rain, there is bugs, there is people touching it, shaking it, and it has to be constantly looked after. That's why if you're careful the first time around to spend the time and make sure you do it right, then we are blessed by God to protect us. And that's part of the idea of the angel protecting us, not only protecting us physically, but protecting us to perform the mitzvot, tefillin, mezuzah, and tzitzit in the appropriate way to serve God. I think we're going to, and the Rabbi goes on to say that those angels protects the person to connect to God, so that he is drawn into studying Torah and serving God, bringing the only kosher food to the house, making sure all activities at home is in accordance with God's way. That's why you need special help on the mezuzah, because the mezuzah is the one who is protecting the house, where majority of the activity of a human being are done, especially then when there was no restaurants to go out, and there was no Starbucks to go, and there was no vacation and cruises. So we can say that together with the time a person sleeps, they spend about 15, 16 hours a day, other than work and synagogue they spend at home. That's where they need more protection than anywhere else. And for that, that's why it says, if you are careful with mezuzah, you are protected in the house as an angel that protects you, together combined with the tefillin and the tzitzit. Also, I don't, perhaps it's inappropriate, I didn't see it, but I'm thinking mezuzah is the only obligation that's done for men and women. Tefillin and tzitzit have a time limit. Tefillin you do only by day. Tzitzit you do only by day, because God says, Uri temotam, you should see them. In other words, only by daytime when you can see it. Mezuzah is continuous, and therefore it's one mitzvah that women are equal to men in their obligation. So if a lady is single, she has to have a mezuzah. Tefillin has to be in the house. If the male is single or married, he needs to have tefillin, he needs to have tzitzit. Women don't have to do that. That's why it shows mezuzah, and that's why it's talking about the power of mezuzah, because for women, it is the only one for them to be able to connect to God. And by doing so, they fulfill the other two without even being busy doing. And that is the Rabbi concludes that will bring the total protection for a human being. And that's the idea from this week's portion. We'll conclude right now. Let me just